Good morning. It's an honor to be here with you today because you are starting such an exciting journey, a challenging journey, but such an exciting journey that will make a huge difference for families and the future of your country. And so again, it is an incredible honor for me to be here with you today, and I thank you for that. And so as you can see today, very quickly, I'd like to do an overview just about what we've learned in the last 30 years about early childhood intervention. And so next slide, please. I'd like to introduce you to my family, and I'll explain why in just a second. On the left-hand side in 1992 is a picture of my two children. And this was the year, I think, that I first went to Portugal and started working with them and they had a pilot project and their desire to build a national system. And so my children were very young at that time. And on the right, you will see now my two children who are both married, have grandchildren now. And so just as my family has grown and changed over the years, so has early childhood intervention. It's very different now from what it was 30 years ago when I started working in the field. Next, please. So this is a quote from one of the classic books, right at the beginning in the United States when our legislation was first passed. So as you can see in this definition, early intervention services are educational, health, and social services, so cross-sectoral, designed to support the development of young children who have been identified as different. And so again, this definition talks about services. And only second do they talk about families at this point in time. They are also designed to support and strengthen the families that are the primary influences on these children. Next, please. So what we have seen over these 30 years as you know, my children have grown, as I've gotten older, as the science has accumulated, what we see is that early childhood intervention has made this paradigm shift from viewing the child as the recipient of services to thinking about the child's parents, caregivers, and families as the principal recipients not only of services, but also supports. And so when I started my career, it was in the old paradigm. I worked at a children's hospital in Ohio. I was the leader of an early intervention team with many disciplines on it. Families came to us. We basically worked from a curriculum. We gave them suggestions about what to do. And that was the science at the time. That's what we thought was the best way to approach this very important task of supporting families who have young children with delays and disabilities. But it is so different now. I'm actually a little embarrassed by thinking about what I was doing 30 years ago compared to what we know we should be doing now. So next slide, please. So here is a definition for 2021, and I hope it explains really some of these major shifts that our field has made. So we start out by saying that early intervention is not about services, it's about supports for parents and families. And so those supports are provided by professionals, but also by other members of the family social network. And we'll talk more about this later, why that is so important. And again, it's about not just knowledge and skills, it's about how do we support families to have the time and the energy as well, so that they can engage their children in what we call everyday child learning opportunities. And our ultimate goal in this model of early child intervention is to promote both child and parent confidence incompetence. So next slide, please. Thank you. So as you can see, I was asked today to really think about the science of early childhood intervention. So I will try my very best not to put anybody to sleep while I'm talking about what we know now that we didn't know necessarily 30 years ago. So next slide, please. Well, what we have known for a very long time is that there is no such thing as a baby. Next slide, please. There is always a baby and someone. Next slide, please. And many of you may have seen this graphic on Facebook. These are is a picture of a functional MRI of a mother who I believe was a neuroscientist kissing her baby. And you can see how the two brains are lighting up in very similar ways. So what we know now is so much more about brain development and what are positive opportunities for brain development. And so what we know is the importance of what we call serve and return. If you think about a tennis match, back and forth, back and forth. It's those kinds of interactions with adults that can really build brain architecture. And so again, there are different types of opportunities which we'll be talking about, but it's really about regular and positive experiences that build the child's brain architecture. And I know that speakers throughout the day will be talking about this very important concept of brain development and neuroplasticity. Next slide, please. But there is no such thing as a baby and someone. There is always the community around the baby and the family. And the community has an incredible impact on child development and parents' availability of time, energy, knowledge, and skills. Next, please. So again, what we have known in this ecological model is that whether parents can perform effectively, whether they will be confident and competent, really depends on stressors and the support coming from their extended family, from the community. So again, I joined early and I heard the first speaker, and yes, these community issues are very, very important. Job schedules, adequacy of childcare, the presence of friends or neighbors, and the quality of health, social services, and neighborhood safety. So there's no such thing as a baby. There's no such thing as a baby and someone. It's always about the baby, the family, and the community. Next, please. So how do we put this science, this ecological model, and what we know about child development into a model that we can all understand? So one of the people that has done that very well in the United States, and I'd be happy to send his article to anybody, is Mike Gorelnik from the University of Washington. Next, please. And it may look a little complicated, but basically the message is, again, we're going to build early childhood intervention to capitalize on neuroplasticity. And so this is what Mike has done, is to really create a model that has looked at all the factors that will impact child development. And so the questions that are asked in this model are at 3 different levels. Questions about the child, how are they able to utilize their resources to expand their competence? At the family level, how do families support the competence of their child? And then again, at the larger level, family resources. What's available to the family that support their time, energy, knowledge, and skills? And so what is a very important message in Mike's developmental systems model is that these pathways operate for all children. Typical children, children at risk due to environmental factors, and children with delays and disabilities. Next, please. So again, this is a slide with a lot of words, but I like to show it just to help us understand the complexity of what goes on in early childhood intervention. So again, what we are doing is looking at child development, but not just the typical domains of, cognition, language, motor, but also things like executive functioning and motivation and emotional regulation. And then as we're trying to understand what's going on with each child and family and building a system, we want to think about the second layer, these, I would say, kind of blue turquoise boxes, the attachment going on between the child and the family, the types of interactions that the child is having, the opportunities that families are providing that are available in the community, and then also very important factors about health and safety of the child. And then we also then even dig deeper into the resources available to the family. So when parents come to us, how are they feeling about their child? How competent do they feel? How confident do they feel? How are they coping with the news that their child may have a delay or disability? And then also thinking at this level about resources, financial resources, but also social support. And so what this model suggests to us is that in early childhood intervention, we need to understand how all these factors work together. And so the most effective programs really depend upon our ability to restore this balance between stressors and then optimal patterns of interaction or supportive or protective factors. So next, please. So what does that mean for what we do when we're with a family? And so I wanted to just take a moment to talk about these 6 practices that are evidence-based, some of which we've known about since the very beginning, but in many ways, all of them have been strengthened by more and more research to support their importance in how we develop our models of early childhood intervention. So I'm going to dig a little deeper now into each one of these. And the first one, next, we're going to put together the puzzle. The first one is everyday child learning opportunities. Next slide, please. So what does that mean? Everyday child learning opportunities. So next slide, please. I have a picture. I want to show you this picture. And what do you think is happening in this picture? And if I were there with you, I'd be asking people to comment, what do you see? Some people may talk about the child playing or spending time with their families or having fun. Well, this is the child, these are children who are learning. This is the work of early childhood. And these are everyday learning opportunities throughout the day that are building the brain architecture of the child. So 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this is where in this model of early intervention, we are going to put our intervention, thinking about what opportunities and experiences are available to the child and how do the parents support these learning opportunities. Next slide. And so again, what we have known since the very beginning is that the influences of environment or these everyday learning opportunities are likely to be maximal when children's participation in everyday activity occurs on a regular basis over extended periods of time. So again, I think this starts us thinking about, it's not just about a professional visit once a week. It's thinking about what happens the remainder of the hours per week and what learning opportunities are available to this child and family. But again, what we know are all these opportunities equally effective. So next slide, please. So what types of experiences are most beneficial in terms of building brain architecture? And again, these are principles that work for all young children. Typical children, children at risk, and children with disabilities. Next slide, please. So Carl Dunst found this cartoon. I love this cartoon because it really illustrates that children learn best when they're interested in something. So again, you can see this array of toys from left to right, you know, a stuffed bear, a $25 baby gym, a $30 activity quilt. Certainly I bought those things for my children. Certainly my children have bought these things for their children. But what is the child interested in? The dead fly, right? And so my grandson now is most interested in pushing around the laundry basket. He has a whole room full of toys, okay? But he's interested in pushing around the laundry basket. And my 3-year-old granddaughter also has many toys in a playroom. But what she loves most is going outside and picking up rocks and picking up sticks and bringing them home and looking at them. So next slide, please. So what we know is that children learn better, just like us adults. Children learn better when they're interested, all right? So instead of adults choosing activities, early childhood intervention should be based on what are the children interested in. And so we know there are significant outcomes when we base our intervention on children's interests. So we see more learning opportunities, engagement, social skills, communication competence, more positive social emotional behavior, more positive and parent benefits compared to just what professionals do in their hour a week with families. So thinking about what happens when we're not there is so important. Next, please. So then the next group of practices are what we call responsive parenting practices. So again, if you'll go on to the next slide, what we know is that different parenting styles have different impacts on child development. And so again, Bronfenbrenner has noted 30 plus years ago that the experiences that parents provide for their children can either promote or impede development. And so science in these last 40, 50 years has really identified the type of parenting interaction styles that really facilitate, that build that brain architecture. So again, building on what the child can do, using child interests, and then these specific ways of interacting with a child. Sensitivity to what we're seeing, reading the cues, following the child's lead, and then responding contingently, okay? So the child acts and we respond, and we try to get this back and forth going on, and then supporting and encouraging exploration. Okay, so that's responsive parenting. So then what does it mean for intervention? So what is this thing called parent-mediated intervention practices? So if you'll go on to the next slide. Let's talk about the number of hours in a week. Oh gosh, I think I had it, it was like 168. And then we think about, you know, let's give the child 10 hours of sleep a night. So that brings us down to 98 hours a week. And so let's think then about, you know, kind of that old model of intervention where a professional would work with the family for an hour a week or work with a child for an hour a week. 1 hour out of 98 hours. So parent-mediated intervention practices means what's happening when we're not there? Well, the child is with the family learning. And how do we support that? So again, we know the power of parents. We've known this forever, that they really have the strongest impact on child development. They have this special social emotional bond. They're the most powerful influence. And again, even if the families are working, you know, they still are the most powerful influence on child development. And parents are always there. And so their opportunities during those 98 hours a week are far more than the traditional, the old model of our working with a child 1 hour a week. 98 or 1? What do you think? So next slide, please. So this next slide that was developed by Carl Dunst really shows how it all fits together. So what we have are responsive parenting practices, building on the child's strengths and interests, doing that throughout the day during everyday child learning opportunities. The bigger context is what the families are doing, those caregiver-mediated practices. And you will see in the center, when those all come together, we see significant child and family outcomes that are listed on both sides in these boxes. Next, please. But another piece of the puzzle is, what are we doing when we're with the family? What are the practices that we use? So again, next please. There are two sets of practices that really have emerged in the science. And again, a lot of this is the work of Carl Dunst. And so first of all, we have the nice building a relationship practices. And you know, we've been doing those for forever, you know, building a relationship with the family. But what we have seen in early childhood intervention is that building this relationship, being nice and warm, it's not enough. It's not enough to make changes. And so what the research has identified is a list of participatory practices where we really are engaging families, we're sharing control, we're encouraging them to use what they know, we're helping them learn new skills, we're encouraging parents to make their own decisions. And so these are difficult practices in this paradigm shift. We've seen this. Professionals are really good at building relationships, but these participatory practices are more difficult often for professionals to understand and acquire. So next, please. And then finally, our sixth is what we call capacity building practices. And these are related to self-efficacy on the family, to resilience, to confidence, so that they have optimism for the future and hope for the future. And again, it's really these capacity building practices that help fit these pieces of the puzzle together. So next, please. So, I'm sorry. If you would go back just one more, please. Go back. I apologize. I got ahead of myself. Thank you. So there are, we think there are kind of two aspects to this. One is utilizing adult learning principles when we're with families, you know, so that families, that caregivers can acquire the knowledge and the skills to support their child's development during those 98 hours a week. But what's also unique about this model is thinking about the inclusion of informal supports. Who's in the family already? Who's in the community already who can support this family's journey? Next, please. And so again, what we know is families don't work on their priorities by themselves. They have people that they trust, not just us, but people in the community that they trust and rely on. And so I think this last bullet point is really important. It's within relationships that families reach their goals. Next slide, please. And so again, the science about the impact of social support and having a strong support system is very key in this model of early childhood intervention. And you can see here the many, many outcomes that have been linked to a strong social support system. So again, early childhood intervention has moved away from a professional 1 hour a week working with the child, maybe the family is watching, to this model of the 98 hours a week and who's there supporting the child and who's there supporting the family. Next slide, please. So how do you put this all together in a system? And again, as you're making all these decisions, you know, who's going to be eligible, what ages are you going to serve, you know, what tools will you use? You know, every country makes those decisions. But I think there's just, again, thinking about this ecological model that underlies early childhood intervention, there are a few questions to think about. Next, please. So when I was in Ukraine in 2017 with a group from Early Aid, it was my first trip to Ukraine, working with 4 pilot regions who were trying to build an ECI system, I was listening in my headphones to translation. And the translator kept saying, early interference. No, 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 I mean early intervention. And he would go on and he would say early interference. No, 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 no. I mean early intervention. So I went back and looked it up. And again, the word, at least in Ukrainian, for early intervention can also mean early interference, which I think is a very important concept. So next, please. So I think this is the old model where we separated the child from the family, where the child went in a room somewhere and a professional worked with them and the family had no idea what was going on. You know, that is not how to build a system. Next slide, please. Because we know what happens between the visits. Those 98 hours is key. And those consistent adults in those 98 hours are really what make a difference for the child and family. And all families have strengths that we can build on. Next, please. Another model, and this is the model where I entered, you know, at least we had families there with a child, but they came to us and we had no idea about what was happening in their lives. And I remember a family, the mother brought her little girl, Lauren. Lauren had been born with hydrocephalus. You know, was not shunted in time, so she looked a little bit different. And so they came to our program, and you know, we worked with mom, we gave her ideas, and then she went home. We had no idea what was happening. Later we found out that when she went home, she and Lauren went inside along with the 4-year-old sister, shut the door, pulled the curtains, and never went outside because she was so sad about her daughter. She didn't know how to handle people's questions or their looks about how Lauren looked. And so again, you know, that was 30 years ago, but I would say that happens now as well. And so next slide, please. This is from a series of focus groups that we had with families in Ohio just recently. And what did parents tell us? When my son first got diagnosed, we knew we weren't the first, but we felt alone. Next slide. I felt alone, alone and trapped. Next slide. At night, I wake up and worry. What will happen if I'm not here? Next slide. Your expectations of what your life is going to be like, the picture that you have, that's the thing you give up, the picture of what it was going to be. Next slide. I felt lonely and isolated, constantly going to doctor's appointments, always felt like I was going somewhere. I didn't really have anyone else to relate to. All my friends were getting excited about their child's milestones. Next slide. So I think it's very important that our definition has shifted in 2021 to think about early childhood intervention as supports, not from us alone, but also from the extended family. Thinking about these key concepts of time, energy, knowledge, and skills throughout the day, those 98 hours a week, building the competence and confidence of both the child and family. Next slide. So here is really what a system should look like. We're not separating from the child from the family. We're not separating the family from their community. We are working hard to support the family, to have the time, energy, and knowledge and skills to be part of their community, to support their child's development. So next, please. So I'd like to just take the last few minutes talking about early aid, which is the European Association on Early Childhood Intervention. Next, please. So the vision began back in 1988. Parents, professionals, scientists from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 countries in Europe. And so they were thinking ahead about the European Union. It was in the future, it was going to happen. And so they really wanted to think about what would this mean, this European Union mean for early childhood intervention and how to advocate for quality systems all over Europe. And so in those years since 1988, Early Aid has grown. It's more than 600 members. It has, primarily members from Europe, but really it's international, with members from North America, South America, Australia, Asia, from around the world. Next, please. And so the objectives have always been to think about how do we increase the quality of life for parents and young children with special needs. Again, thinking about inclusion and diversity, making sure that resources are available to all families. Second objective is to think about building systems across Europe. 3 is thinking about the ethics, values and ethics of early childhood intervention. And there is an Early Aid manifesto that's on their website. And then number 4 is thinking about how do we train professionals in this model of ECI. So how does Early Aid do that? Next slide, please. So a lot of dissemination, training, research, supporting systems change, exchanging information. Many of the projects involve multiple countries, so there's a lot of information exchange, and then promoting collaboration within and across countries. And so one way to do that, the next slide please, is Early Aid typically has an annual conference, recently interrupted by the pandemic. But what Early Aid has done often is to place that conference and collaborate with a country that wants to build awareness about an ECI system. So as you can see, the conferences have been all across Europe. Next slide. So these are just some examples of recent projects. As you can see, the first one was developing training for physiotherapists about this model. The second was disability specific, but applying this model of early childhood intervention to people who work with children with cerebral palsy and their families. And then the last model, the Agora project, included 7 countries, training professionals, increasing their skills, but also part of it was then how do those professionals work in their countries to build their system. So next slide, please. Here are some pictures from some of the training that has been done and some of the meetings that have happened across Europe. Next slide, please. There's also on the Early Aid website, which will come up in a second, early childhood, recommended practices in early childhood intervention, which has been translated into multiple languages. Next, please. Here are some pictures of training, some that I've been honored to be part of for Ukraine, Serbia, now online. I'm joining a training for Tajikistan just in a few minutes. And it's just built wonderful partnerships. So as you think about building your system, there will be challenges. This family-centered framework is new. It will be a paradigm, it could be a paradigm shift for some professionals. But how do we think about this cross-sectoral collaboration? And again, when you go back and think about Mike Goralnik's developmental systems model, it's going to take cross-sectoral collaboration. It's going to take a community to promote this early childhood intervention system. And again, finally, thinking about how do we build the knowledge and skills and time and energy of the professionals who are involved in this very important work. Next, please. So I'd like to invite you to join Early Aid. All right, here's the website, here's the Facebook page. Membership is free. And it's a wonderful community. And finally, I would like to leave you with this, which is a quote from a Portuguese author, a Portuguese poet. So if you could go to the last slide, please. And this is a Portuguese poet who's won, prizes for her poetry. Many of the things we need can wait. The child cannot. Right now is the time his bones are being formed, his blood is being made, and his senses are being developed. To him we cannot answer tomorrow. His name is today. So it's very clear that this is your vision in Latvia, not to wait till tomorrow, but to make things happen today. And I thank you again for the honor of being with you.